Chapter 5 Wallis. This is how Lady Furness described Mrs. Simpson's early life to Edward. Wallis was born in Baltimore. She never knew her father. He died when she was 5 months old. But her mother was a strong and loving woman, and Wallis was a happy child. When she was 20, she married a man called Winfield Spencer. For the first few years, they were happy together. But one day, Winfield lost some money in the street. He was very angry. When he came home, he took a bottle of whiskey from a cupboard and began to drink. That night, he hit Wallis in the mouth. She screamed and he hit her again. There was blood on her face and she was shaking like a leaf. "Please, Winfield," she said, "no more." But Winfield took her arm and pulled her up the stairs. "You are my prisoner," he shouted at her, "and you are not going to leave." Then he pushed her into the bathroom and locked the door. The next morning, Wallis went back to her family. "I can't stay with him," she said. "I want a divorce." "Poor Wallis," Edward said. "But what happened next, Lady Furness?" "Well," said Lady Furness, "a few months later, she met a fine man called Ernest Simpson. He's quiet but interesting. They got married and they now live in a beautiful flat in the center of London." "And are they happy?" asked Edward. Lady Furness looked at the prince and smiled. "I don't know, sir," she said. "I don't know." During the next 2 years, the prince saw Wallis once or twice a week. They had the same friends, and they often met at parties. Mrs. Simpson knew a lot about life. Edward once said she loved books, food, people, and travel. She was very beautiful and her eyes are full of fire. She was friendly and easy to talk to, and after a while I opened up my heart. We had no secrets. I told her everything, and that's how it all began. His eyes are always sad, Wallis said about Edward, and sometimes he looked like a child. So young, so quiet, so weak. He had no real friends. Perhaps people were a little afraid of him. But he was a warm and kind man. When he talked to me, I felt my heart jump. I wanted to be alone with him, but I knew that wasn't possible. Did the prince love me in those early days? No, I don't think so. But each time we met, we just felt closer and closer. In June 1933, Edward gave a birthday party for Wallis, and during the next few months, he visited the Simpson flat in London almost every day. One evening, the prince asked Wallis and Ernest to go skiing in Austria. "I'm sorry, sir," Mr. Simpson replied. "I have to go to America on business." "But perhaps Wallis and her aunt can come with you. We went to Kitchbull as friends," Wallis wrote later. "But when we came home, we were in love, and a few months later, the prince asked me to marry him. It was just like a dream." Chapter 6 The King is Dead. Long live the king. In January 1936, Edward went to Windsor for a few weeks. He was tired of town life and he wanted to work in his garden and ride his horses. But then, one afternoon, there was a phone call from Queen Mary. Edward, she said, "You must come back immediately. Your father is very ill and I think he is going to die." When Edward arrived, he went straight to his father's room. He walked to the side of the bed and kissed his father's white face. The king opened his eyes and smiled. Then he took his son's hand and said, "Be a good king, Edward, and be good to your mother." "Yes, father, I will." The king closed his eyes and did not speak again. Just after midnight, he died. The Queen Mary took Edward's hand and kissed it. "My child, you are now king," she said softly. "God be with you." His 3 brothers came to him one by one and they each kissed his hand. "The king is dead. Long live the king," they said. At 1 o'clock, Edward left the room to telephone Wallace. "My father is dead," he said. "I'm so sorry, sir." "I must stay here for a while," Edward went on, "but I will phone you at the weekend. Nothing will change between you and me. I love you more than ever, and you will be my queen." "Let's not talk about that now," Wallace replied. "You must go back to your family." "But you are my family, Wallace. You are everything to me. Good night. Sleep well." When Wallace put the phone down that night, she suddenly felt afraid. "Edward is now king," she thought. "But what will happen to me?" Chapter 7. The Charge. In the spring of 1936, Mrs. Simpson wrote a letter to her husband. "Dear Ernest," she wrote, "you have been very kind to me. You are a good and strong man. But I must tell you that our marriage is finished. I am in love with the king and I want a divorce. Don't be angry. There is nothing you can do. I'll never forget you. But I have to be free." Ernest replied immediately, "Your letter arrived this morning. I will do what you ask. But I will never stop loving you. And if you need me, I'll always be here." That night the king and Wallace met at a small restaurant in Piccadilly. Edward read Ernest's letter again and again. "That's wonderful news," he said. "Nothing can stop us now." The next day, when Edward came down to breakfast, Jordan Lang, the Archbishop of Canterbury, was waiting for him. "Good morning, Gordon," the king said. "How nice to see you again. And what can I do for you?" For a minute the Archbishop said nothing. Then he opened a small black bag and took out their newspapers. "I have to come to see you about Mrs. Wallace Simpson," he began. "The newspaper said that you want to marry her. Are these stories true, sir?" "Yes, Gordon. Wallace is going to be my wife." "But that's not possible," the Archbishop replied. "You know what the church thinks about marriage and divorce? Divorce is wrong in the eyes of God." Edward smiled and then said, "Can I ask you some questions about God, Mr. Lang?" "Yes, of course, sir. Is God happy when two people fall in love?" Yes, sir, but. And is God happy when two people fall in love and get married? Yes, sir, but. And is God happy when two people fall in love, get married, and live happily together? Yes, sir, but then Archbishop Wallace and I will make God very happy. We are in love, we will get married, and we will live together happily. But you don't understand, sir, Mr. Lang replied. The church says that divorce is wrong. Mrs. Simpson cannot leave Mr. Simpson and then marry you. You must forget about her and find another woman. Please, sir, I must ask you to think again. That is not possible, Edward said softly. When Wallace is free, I shall marry her. There was a long silence. The Archbishop looked down at the floor and shook his head. You are making a big mistake, sir, he said. The church is very strong and we will not have this woman as our queen. Suddenly Edward stood up, his face red and angry. Thank you for coming, he said. But I have nothing more to say, and I want to be alone. The Archbishop stood up to go, but then turned and touched the king's arm. Please, sir, think again. The charge will be against you. I don't care, Edward replied. I have God on my side, and that is all I need. Goodbye, Mr. Lang. Chapter 8 The Storm. In July and August, Wallace and the king sailed the Mediterranean. They met Prime Minister met Texas in Greece, Kemal Atatürk in Turkey, and King Boris in Bulgaria, but that summer is famous for Edward's clothes. On the January, from Athens to Istanbul, the king took off his shirt to get brown in the sun. It was hot, and 10 minutes later, he was asleep, so he did not see the young photographer who was now taking pictures of the king. When Edward returned from the Mediterranean, there was a letter waiting for him. It was from Mr. Albert Thompson of Birmingham, who wrote, I saw a picture of you in the newspaper this morning and I felt very angry. I have never seen a king dressed as badly as you were. No shirt and no tie, no shoes, no hat, and in short trousers. How could you, sir? Edward showed this letter to Stanley Broadwood, the Prime Minister. What do you think of this? The king asked. Mr. Thompson is right, sir, the Prime Minister replied. You want to be modern, but the people don't like it. Edward put the letter on the fire. And do you think that divorce is modern, Mr. Baldwin? The Prime Minister sat down. Yes, sir, he began. I have read about this Mr. Simpson. She has 2 husbands still alive. And you must understand what that means, sir. She cannot marry a king, but I cannot live without her, Edward said. Then, sir, the Prime Minister replied, I can see there's a storm coming. I have talked to your family and to Archbishop Lang, and we will not have this woman as our queen. That night the Prime Minister and the King spoke for many hours. There was hundreds of questions, but only one answer. And so, in the early hours of the next morning, Edward said, You tell me that Wallace cannot marry a king, So there is only one thing that I can do. To give the crown to my brother and leave England. I must follow my heart. You tell me that it's a crime to fall in love. You tell me that it's wrong to be happy. How strange this country is. An hour later, Edward telephoned Wallis. The Prime Minister said that a storm is coming. Edward said, "So I want you to go away." Wallis packed her bags and left for France. Then Edward went to see his mother. It was a sad, strange, and angry meeting. "Do you know what you are doing?" the Queen asked. "Look out of that window. Outside this palace there are 400 million people who call you king. They need you. And you will leave all this for Mrs. Simpson?" "Yes, mother, I will. I'm in love." "Love?" Queen Mary shouted. "You are a king. You must love your country first." "But I'm also a man," Edward said softly, "and there's nothing that I can do." That afternoon, the king telephoned Winston Churchill, one of his closest friends. "I have some sad news," Edward began. "Last night, Mr. Baldwin came to see me. I have decided to go away next week." "Do you mean on holiday, sir?" "No, Winston. I'm leaving England. I'm never coming back. George will be king." "But that's not right, sir. You are a free man. You must stand and fight." "No," the king said. "I have seen war and it's a terrible thing. I don't want to fight again." "But the people love you. And they want Wallis to be queen." "Perhaps they do," Edward replied. "But she cannot be queen. My enemies are stronger than I. I am just a sailor, and when the winds change, the sea moves and it takes my boat away." Please follow the next video.